the Rajya Sabha the right to sit on a bill for more than a year or two, you're really damaging the federal principle, aren't you?
I want to say something.
Karan, how do you achieve that? Given the fractured relations between the government and the opposition, how do you pass any bill? How do you make any law? If the opposition today holds a gun to the head of the government and says, we will not debate, we will not discuss, we will tell you, we dismiss certain ministers or chief ministers, we will only stay in the well of the house. How do you pass anything? So I think it's easy said, but some kind of pressure, and it will only be public pressure and public opinion.
You're saying that the answer to intransigence, you're saying, Naresh Gujral, that the answer to intransigence or the implacability of the opposition is not better political management, as Mr. Chari suggested, not the capacity to reach out and accommodate, as Mr. Pavan Verma suggested, but reform of the way the Rajya Sabha functions at the cost of possibly undermining its federal structure and the fact that it represents the states in a way in which the Lok Sabha doesn't. Do you really mean to go so far, Naresh Gujral?
Well, unfortunately, the way Parliament is being conducted, especially the Rajya Sabha, I'm very sorry to say, some kind of drastic change is required, because if session after session is going to be washed out, and if the government's economic as well as the other agenda is not going to be passed, then no government can function.
You wanted to come in there.
And that is why it calls not only for a debate, as the finance minister said, but also reform.
You wanted to come in there, Mr. Charlie, very quickly.
I wanted to say something about the 2 years wait.
Go ahead.
See, why wait for 2 years? Actually, the Constitution provides that if the Rajya Sabha doesn't pass the bill
the joint session
for 6 months, then you can have a joint sitting. The President will
Can I answer that question? I'll tell you, I'll answer that question without actually answering on behalf of Arun Jaitly, but I imagine that's the answer he'd give. The joint session can only work to the government's favour if the government and its allies have such a large majority in the lower house that they have a dominant majority in the joint session. It is possible, if the BJP had come to power with 282 without an NDA around it, that a joint session wouldn't have worked.
Well,
so a joint session isn't a sufficient answer to the problem.
That is for them to work out, but the point is that Constitution has shown the way.
And that is the only way you're saying?
Yeah, that is the only way.
You're saying you don't need to try and find new answers. The answers are in the Constitution. Yeah. And at the end of the day,
that is what I meant.
If you don't have a majority, then you need political management, not reform.
Yeah, that was my first point. But this is my second point.
All right, gentlemen, let's take a break at that point. When I come back, I'm going to turn to another form of reform for the Rajya Sabha that's being proposed. This time not by the Finance Minister, but by a BJD MP, Jai Panda, who will be joining us after the break to put that to my guests himself. He wants to question and change the way Rajya Sabha MPs are appointed. Don't choose them indirectly, he says. The time has come to follow the American Senate and have direct elections for the Rajya Sabha. Join us after the break for the second part of this critical discussion. Welcome back to our special discussion on the Finance Minister's call for a debate on Rajya Sabha reforms. We're now also joined by BJD Lok Sabha MP Jai Panda. Jai Panda, you believe that like the American Senate, the Rajya Sabha in India should be directly and not indirectly elected. That's another reform that I now want to come on and discuss. Why do you believe it's necessary for the Rajya Sabha to be directly elected, and what benefit will that confer?
Precisely because our Rajya Sabha was partly modelled on the US Senate, and they have faced exactly the same problems and fixed it in a certain way. Now, in both the US Senate and the Indian Rajya Sabha, the members are supposed to represent their entire state. And in the US, for the first 130 years of their nation as a republic, they used to have indirect elections just like us, with the Senate members being elected from the state assemblies. Now, essentially, what happened there is exactly what has become here, which is that the upper house members do not actually represent their state. They have become party nominees, because it is proportional representation from the state assembly depending on the party strength. Once you get nominated by the party, it's a fait accompli. So they are not doing the constitutional duty which they are supposed to do, which is to represent their state and not represent their party views. And for that purpose, a general election, a direct election for the Rajya Sabha would ensure that Rajya Sabha members have to represent the broadest possible views of their state and not be just dictated to by their party whips, which is another reform that is required, because the party whip has completely taken out the concept of MPs, Rajya Sabha MPs representing the state.
Naresh Gujral, there are two arguments put forward there by Jay Panda for directly electing Rajya Sabha MPs. Let me put the first to you. He believes that this is the only way of ensuring that Rajya Sabha MPs actually represent the state that they are elected from, rather than their party bosses or the narrow viewpoint of their party. That this is the best way of fulfilling the state mandate that the Rajya Sabha is supposed to have. How do you respond to that argument?
Well, first of all, even in the American Senate, a senator may be representing a state, but he certainly votes along, most of the time, along party lines. And that is exactly what we do in the Rajya Sabha. But coming to the main issue, the moment a Rajya Sabha member of parliament is going to be elected, then, like the American Senate, he will be more powerful than even the Lok Sabha member. You would appreciate that the powers of the Senate in the United States are far more than the Congress. So in that case, this requires a huge constitutional change, which I don't think is feasible today.
Now, Pavan Verma, the second argument put forward by Jay Panda for directly electing Rajya Sabha MPs rather than indirectly electing them is that that would be the way of breaking the capacity of party leaders to use their state legislature members to push through people of their choice and preference. A direct election would mean the winning candidate has to be a man of popular support rather than a man with simple loyalty to party leaders. It would break the hold of party leaders on Rajya Sabha MPs. A, do you agree? And B, do you think that's a good reason for reform?
I must confess I don't agree. I appreciate Jay's attempts to think of reform. Democracies must evolve and good new ideas are always welcome, and I'll tell you why I don't agree. You see, firstly, Naresh pointed out one of the reasons, that even if people were to stand from the state, they would become party nominees supported by their parties. So the person who wins on behalf of a direct election would still be in some manner or the other organically linked to a party and would therefore follow that writ to some extent. And that is actually what happens even in the US Senate. So it doesn't solve that problem. Secondly, whether direct elections make people more responsible and less partisan legislators, I don't think it's proven. Today the Lok Sabha, where the current party or other parties have had a majority, each member follows the party whip on issues without necessary application of mind.
Okay.
And therefore the fact that they are directly elected does not make them that much either autonomous, independent or wiser, except in following the herd principle of what their party is pushing.
Okay.
There can be internal discussions, but so I don't believe it solves the problem. It's like the suggestion to have a presidential form of government. Not enough thought is given to it,
okay,
but it's an area of reform that often crops up.
Okay. Now, I want to put to you, Mr. Chari, the concern that Naresh Gujral brought up. He pointed out that if Rajya Sabha MPs are directly elected, they would represent the entire state and not just a constituency within it. Lok Sabha MPs only represent their constituency. So if you have directly elected Rajya Sabha MPs representing an entire state, won't they become people with a bigger mandate than Lok Sabha MPs, and therefore wouldn't that unbalance the balance between the two houses? You'd suddenly have Rajya Sabha MPs with a bigger mandate than individual Lok Sabha MPs.
See, the symmetry that is there in the constitution, the structure that we have, that is something which has been arrived at after a lot of deliberations by wise men. The point is, if you are going to have a directly elected Rajya Sabha, then why should we have a Rajya Sabha at all? If it is a directly elected house, why should we have that house? There is already Lok Sabha which is directly elected.
The Americans have two houses, both directly elected.
Well, the point is, when Rajya Sabha was created, and the powers and functions of Rajya Sabha have been laid down in the Constitution. But they had a certain idea about the constitutional structure that we should have in our country.
You're saying don't tinker and change it.
Yeah, we have a federal structure with certain unitary features, and Rajya Sabha basically represents that federal structure in our country.
But would a direct election damage that? That's the question.
No, direct election and then...
But answer that, sir, because we're running out of time. Would a direct election damage the federal structure?
Well, direct election, I won't be able to say whether it damages, but I won't put it like that. But the point is, the symmetry that is there in the Constitution will be disturbed if we do that.
And that will be to the detriment of the Constitution?
Yes, certainly, as it is.
You would also say there'd be no gain in the way that Jaipanda claims there would be a gain?
I don't think we will have any kind of gain, any perceptible kind of gain by doing that.
Abhishek Singhvi, the criticism of Rajya Sabha MPs today is that they are indirectly elected and therefore they are not fully representative of the people. And secondly, they are often creatures of party bosses rather than their own masters. On the other hand, if Rajya Sabha MPs are directly elected, you could argue that they could end up with a bigger mandate than, say, Lok Sabha MPs, and therefore they become more powerful, and secondly, that could change the balance between the two houses. Would you accept that this is not an easy circle to square, if I can put it like that?
While I always appreciate Jaipanda as a man brimming with ideas, he's always got new good ideas, I think unfortunately this would not only drive a coach and four through our constitutional structure, but actually would amount to fixing a square peg in a round hole. You see, the Senate, which elects directly, is premised upon a presidential veto. Senators and even congressmen are very different than MPs because of the presidential veto. The countervailing power in a presidential system is a presidential veto. In a parliamentary democracy, which is what we are, the party whip or the party grouping must prevail. Otherwise you must change. Now a senator can initiate legislation himself. He can start the legislation. He can propose, move a bill. MPs cannot. The whole structure is different. And if both houses pass it, the president can veto it. Now this structure is radically different from what we have, which is a parliamentary democracy where the Prime Minister is a subset of the legislature belonging to the party in power. The President Obama need not belong to the party in power at all. He may have nothing to do with the party in power. The Democrats may be in a minority or a majority. So you are really putting round pegs in square holes and square pegs in round holes, completely different structures. Either you have a Constitutional Review Commission and do the whole kind of a new Constituent Assembly. Otherwise you'll be doing great disservice, because tinkering with parts of the Constitution is a recipe for disaster. Each is so integrated that in this particular example, you require actually 100 articles to be changed, apart from the structure to be changed. And of course, there is always the omnipresent, omniscient basic structure argument, whether we will pass that, because you cannot transplant a US presidential system into a Indian parliamentary democracy, which are two totally different models.
Absolutely, I accept your point, except that to conclude by saying that Jaipanda was trying to transplant a US presidential system on an Indian parliamentary model would be a bit of an unfair exaggeration. He's simply talking about changing the manner in which Rajya Sabha MPs are chosen, but I accept your bigger point. Samit Patra, where does the BJP stand on this issue? I should point out for the audience that Arun Jaitly has never and probably does not believe you need to change the way Rajya Sabha MPs are chosen, but would you as a party extend your debate about reforms of the Rajya Sabha to include the way Rajya Sabha MPs are chosen?
Now, as far as what Mr. Bajant Panda was proposing, with all due regards to Mr. Panda, he's a very wise man. But on this, if we accept what he has said, it would be just opposite to the logic of Mr. Arun Jaitly. In fact, the end result would be a more powerful Rajya Sabha than a Lok Sabha, in the sense that it's not that the people who would be elected from constituency. They would be representing the whole state. So as most of the able guests over here in the panel have said, that would be a very powerful Rajya Sabha. So the premise on which we are facing a discussion on Lok Sabha, which has a particular government, a particular mandate, that should reflect to Rajya Sabha. That will not happen if this is accepted. So at the end, I would say, the basic thing that I believe I want to convey to the people through your program is, people's mandate has to be respected. And what Mr. Chari was saying, that wise men have deliberated 2 years to bring in what the Constitution is, to which I would say there are amendments then.
Well,
No one is questioning their wisdom.
Wise men are not finite in number. They occur generation after generation, and surely later generations have a right. Very quickly, Pavan Verma, because I'm out of time. In 10 seconds only. Go ahead, Pavan Verma.
10 seconds. I think what Mr. Samvit Patra has let on is that what the BJP wants is an emasculated upper house which endorses automatically the tyranny of the majority of the Lok Sabha.
But the problem, Pavan Verma, and this is why I'm interrupting you, is that on this particular point about how Rajya Sabha MPs are chosen, you and Sambit are on the same side. Both of you are opposed to Jay Panda. So let's leave that out. You're playing party politics with each other, but you're both on the same side. You're both opposed to Jay Panda. Jay Panda, I'm going to give the last word to Jay Panda because this was his proposal. He's the only one making it. And I want to put to you, Jay Panda, the key concern that's been echoed by probably everyone, that if Rajya Sabha MPs are directly elected, they could end up becoming more powerful than Lok Sabha MPs, because they could then claim to have a bigger mandate and claim to be more representative of the people than any single lower house MP. And that would unbalance our federal structure and unbalance the relationship between the two houses. How do you respond to that?
No, they would not be more powerful than Lok Sabha MPs. They would be better able to implement their own constitutional mandate, which is to represent the entire state. Even today, the constitution mandates that the Rajya Sabha MPs are supposed to represent the entire state, but since they are not elected from the public, they go by a party whip rather than representing the entire state. Please remember, I'm not proposing any other constitutional change. The Lok Sabha would still have the ability to decide solely on money bills, and the Rajya Sabha MPs would be more representative in implementing what the Constitution actually stipulates them to do.
All right, Jay Panda, this is clearly an idea that hasn't got great approval on this panel, but it's an idea that is interesting and it may well appeal to the people of India. And it certainly is an idea that needs to be discussed along with Arun Jaitly's proposals, that we need to put some sort of curb on the capacity of the Rajya Sabha as the upper house to hold up legislation passed by the lower house. My thanks to all my guests for joining me, and if you have been, thanks for watching. Goodbye, good night.